Hi, I'm Jenny Jeffress, and I'm the Executive Director of the Madison Public Library Foundation. Welcome to our educational workshop series. Today, we have a workshop that's called Get Smart, Tech Tips to Prevent Identity Theft. This topic actually came to us because folks have filled out our surveys at past educational events, and many people were interested in cybersecurity and how to prevent identity theft and kind of some of the spam and other things that kind of come through our phones and our emails and concerns about that. So we respond when you fill out the surveys. And so we really appreciated that feedback. And clearly there's a lot of you who are here today who are interested in this topic. The foundation hosts these educational workshops for both our donors as well as Madison residents and library patrons. And we really like to provide this kind of virtual content to bring information that you guys care about. We also do this as part of our planned giving series. So we do a number of workshops that relate to estate planning, using wills, using insurance, how to prepare for charitable giving. So those are also some of the workshops that we do. We will have one more workshop this year. So if you are on our email list or follow our newsletter, you'll see information about one more virtual workshop before year end. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our moderator. Her name is Jennifer Hannon, and she's a shareholder at Godfrey Kahn. Jen is actually a terrific volunteer. She serves on our board of directors, and she is the chair of our donor development committee as well. And the way that we bring you this great content is because we have wonderful volunteers who help us do that each time we bring these virtual workshops to you. So thanks to Jen. Take it away.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you to those in Cyberland for joining us today. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our featured speaker, but just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please type them and send them using the Q&A feature you can find at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer questions at the end of the program. Also, keep an eye out for that survey Jenny mentioned, because that'll be emailed to you later today. In addition to hearing whether our content was useful to you today, we'd also love to hear your ideas for future program topics. So today it's my pleasure to introduce Justin Webb. Justin is the co-chair of Godfrey Kahn's Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Practice Group, as well as the firm's Chief Information Security Officer. In addition to managing all aspects of information security for the firm, he advises clients on data breach prevention and response, compliance with national and international privacy and data security laws, technology transactions, and properly allocating cybersecurity and privacy risk in mergers and acquisitions. Justin holds the Certified Information Privacy Professional US certification from the International Association of Privacy Professionals. Welcome, Justin.
Hey, thanks, Jen. Really excited to be here and to answer some questions and talk about cybersecurity today. So as Jen said, definitely submit questions. We want to leave enough time at the end to answer questions that you might have, and looking forward to this session today.
Great, let's dive in.
All right.
It's easy to look at things like cybersecurity, hacking, and data breaches and feel overwhelmed. Sometimes it seems like no matter how hard we try, protecting ourselves is near impossible. In fact, we consistently hear things like data breaches are not a matter of if, but when. So as we start our conversation today, what one piece of advice would you recommend we keep in mind about cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people don't really understand kind of, fully the concepts of cybersecurity, and also sort of, there are tons of people who spend all day long trying to break into accounts and compromise, financial resources or your personal information. And those people, that are doing these attacks, they treat these as a job. So if you go into the office from 9 to 5 and do the work that's sort of assigned to you, these kind of attackers, that's exactly what they do. They might work different hours than you do, but they'll spend 8 to 10 hours in the office, break it into your accounts and stealing money from your PayPal account, or sending you malicious messages on Facebook, or doing any of those kinds of things. So you really have to treat it like it's an all day long, everyday exercise to maintain cybersecurity for yourself. And you'll hear me harp on this throughout the conversation, but the one thing if you learn nothing else from this conversation about cybersecurity, especially for your own personal security, is multi-factor authentication is one of the best ways to prevent cyber attacks from being successful. So multi-factor authentication is instead of just logging into an account or a platform with just a password, you also have to get a text message and confirm that you are actually the person who's logging in, or you may have an authenticator app on your phone that provides you a little code that you use. And the concept of that is that your entire security of your account isn't based on just a password. So for example, if your password is fluffy1, that is the only thing standing between you and an attacker. When you use multi-factor authentication, which is just adding another factor of security, you put in place another step that somebody has to overcome before they can break into your account. So like I said, sending you a text message or using a code from an application. And pretty much every provider out there, whether it's Gmail, Facebook, Yahoo, whoever, your bank, any financial institution should have two-factor authentication that you can use. I use it on my Gmail account, on my Hotmail account, on my Yahoo account. I have tons of email accounts for no good reason. And I use it on pretty much every financial platform that I use, really no matter what, because it's a good way to not have your accounts compromised.
Great, thank you. So what are the most common attack mechanisms you come across, and do they have anything in common?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'll talk about sort of like financial account compromises first and then email account compromises. So, the way attackers break into accounts is a few ways. The first is that they take passwords. So let's say you have an account at Facebook and an account at target.com, right? So you shop online at Target and you also have a Facebook account. If you use the same password at both of those sites, or a password that's extremely similar, so maybe one is fluffy1 and the other one is fluffy2, if Target has a data breach, and Target did have a data breach a long time ago of credit cards, attackers will take those passwords, which get out onto the internet, and start trying to log into other places. So they'll try your Facebook account, they'll try your bank, and a lot of people, I see a question that says whether or not I'm worth it to be hacked, whether there's value. If you have money in any financial account, you are worth hacking. So I tell everybody, nobody is above an attacker, and they're looking for low-hanging fruit, which means people who have the least good cybersecurity measures. So if you use the same password across multiple sites, that is an easy way for attackers to break into your other accounts. And we see this all the time with data breaches that I handle. The way they get in is they just get the password from somewhere else. So that's why multi-factor authentication is really important. And that applies to your bank account, to your 401k, your IRA, any financial account that you have whatsoever. If you have PayPal or Venmo or any place that has access to financial resources, we see a lot of like gift card fraud too, which is like, I steal the money that's in your gift card account. And all of those are just password reuse problems that you can do by having unique passwords across websites, and absolutely not using the same password across places. The other thing is that if you have trouble remembering passwords, the places that you should have very unique passwords are places that are tied to money. So your bank account, you should absolutely not use the same password for that account or any 401k that's the same as like your email account or Facebook or anything like that. And you should prioritize how strong the passwords are based on the risk. And a lot of people think, well, it's just my email account. If they break into it, I don't care. But keep in mind that the way that I reset your password for your financial account or for your 401k is an email is sent into your email account. So if I break into your email account, I can just go to Bank of America, try and log in as you. My login is just your username or your email address. I hit reset password, it sends you an email into your email account, and I'm automatically into your account if your bank doesn't have good security. So your email account is absolutely one of the places that you need to secure the most. And I think a lot of people don't think, maybe your email account gets compromised and somebody sends out some spam. But if your email account gets compromised, you should be looking through to see if any passwords were reset. And keep in mind that if I'm a smart attacker, I will go into your email account and delete all of those password reset requests that I've done for you. And so you might not see anything and think, oh, they were just in there sending some spam. They don't care about little old me. But you've got to be very careful, and they could be into your bank account the next day and the day after that into another account, and you'd have absolutely no idea. So I think starting with first principles and securing things with two-factor authentication is really important. And just another point of clarity on two-factor authentication, you can do that with your phone. So for example, on my phone, when I log into my bank, I use facial recognition on the phone as the second factor. But what I think a lot of people forget is that that's only the second factor on your phone. If you don't go into the actual account itself and tell it that you want to use two-factor, somebody can still log into your bank account with just a password. So you actually have to change the setting in your bank account to say, I want to both use, Face ID on my mobile phone, and if I log in on a computer, I want you to text me or to ask me for a separate passcode before I can log in. So I think the major way we see attacks happening is password reuse. The other way that we see is people clicking on links in emails. So you get an email that looks like it comes from somebody that you know, or maybe somebody you don't know, and it says something that is enticing, and you can't help but click on it. And that leads you to a website that will either infect your computer or ask you to provide your login and password. And again, one of the things, even if you click on one of those sites and it asks you for your login and password, if you set up multi-factor authentication, that kind of attack won't be successful, because even if I know your login and your password, if it still has to text you before you can get into an account, that takes off a whole type of set of compromises. So if you have multi-factor authentication, you prevent password guessing, password brute forcing, and situations in which you accidentally enter your login credentials to a hacker's setup account. But spam email and phishing emails are being sent all day long, every day. What I tell employees at Godfrey and anybody that will listen is if it's an email that you weren't expecting, or it's from a party that you have no idea who they are, you should never click on the link. I think a lot of people have gotten away from making phone calls to confirm things or talking with people on the phone. Everything now is, I got an email, or, I got a text message. But if it's an email and you don't know who it is, call the person. And when you call them, do not call them with the information that's in the email that was sent to you that may be questionable, but call them on their main number, that you look up on the internet. So if it's an email from US Bank, and it says, click here to reset your password, and you're not sure that you asked them to reset your password, call US Bank and say, why did I get this email? And by doing that, you're verifying that they actually sent it, and that there's somebody else on the other end other than a Russian hacker sitting in their basement waiting for you to click on it or do something that will help them to break into something.
Great. So how do you think the pandemic has affected the types of cyber attacks we're seeing? Everybody's online right now. Have cyber attacks been more or less successful?
I think for the most part, they've been more successful. And part of that is because people have been forced to be online, and for jobs where people wouldn't be online all day or on Zoom webinars, or using remote VPNs and systems to get into their work. That has increased the audience, I think, for some of these types of attacks. I think the other thing is that, the pandemic has been long, and people are tired and they've been working probably more than they normally have in some situations because of work from home where things don't really shut off. And it feels like you're working all of the time. And so anytime people are getting tired or feeling overworked, that's when they start clicking on things more. Their guard comes down. And so there's been a bunch of statistics that have come out and said attackers definitely saw the pandemic as an opportunity to throw more attacks at people, try harder to break into people's accounts or into, their employers. So it's been an interesting time. And if you remember back at the beginning of the pandemic, when we all started using Zoom and there was this whole Zoom bombing problem where there wasn't enough security in Zoom and people were just jumping into Zoom meetings and doing all kinds of inappropriate things. Thankfully, Zoom has fixed that problem. But anytime you see something that would be like, oh, that's really bad, I hope people are very kind to each other and take care of each other. Think of that as an opportunity for an attacker to come after you. I have not seen anything that isn't so low for attackers. As a side note, I think of that in the real world as well. Fun fact, one of my neighbors was arrested because they were going to looking at cemetery listings for funerals and then robbing people's houses while they were at funerals. So there's no bad thing that happens that an attacker doesn't look for to take advantage of. That's a sad story, but it's true online as it is in person.
Speaking of the bad guys, we often hear nothing about whether people are caught after an attack has been successful. In all our discussions, it's usually about how to prevent things, but do hackers get arrested and charged, and are enforcement activities effective?
Yeah, I would like to say that the answer to this is yes. We're perp walking a bunch of people all the time, for their attacks. But the reality is that that's just not the case. And the reason is most of the attacks that we see, so the people breaking into your accounts and stealing money and engaging all these kinds of scams, are often overseas. And because of the volume of attacks, the way the FBI and the Secret Service, which are the two sort of law enforcement agencies that really investigate these kinds of things, if the loss isn't above $250,000, it's highly unlikely that anybody is going to spend a bunch of time trying to figure out who did what and go find the person. What the FBI and Secret Service are looking for is patterns of attacks that are very similar, or where losses are aggregated above $250,000. Or some other figure that they set in their own sort of office. There have been lots of takedowns of ransomware gangs, and there have been some high-profile prosecutions of attackers, but I'm really trying to think of a scenario in which I can think of, other than where an employee engages in like hacking at their company, or where they did something very stupid in attacking and didn't hide their IP address. For the most part, these attackers spend as much time trying to prevent people from determining who they are as they do in the attacks themselves. So it's not often that people get prosecuted. And it's funny, you spend some time kind of reading up about attackers, and there was an article about some of the Russian gangs that do a lot of these attacks. And they're overseas, driving Lamborghinis and having like $1 million weddings, and, living the life. And that certainly doesn't make anybody trying to secure places on a day-to-day basis feel very good. And I think that's why you've seen a lot more focus from the federal government on this problem, because it's not going away, especially ransomware.
So while we've been talking about passwords, there have been a couple of questions that have come in that I'm also interested in. The first being, how do you keep track of all your passwords in a secure way? Many of us have tons of passwords, and if they all have to be different and we all have to have two-factor authentication, where do we store all these passwords?
Yes, that's a good question. I'm a big proponent of password managers. So there are programs called LastPass or 1Password that you can use, and there are a few of them. There's a couple other ones like Dasher, um, but if you look for password managers and make sure it's a reputable one, like LastPass, 1Password, and Dasher are all good products. And effectively what they do is they store your passwords. And if you're on your computer, they will automatically enter those passwords into websites that you're logging in. They will set the password for you to something extremely complex. And, I get a lot of questions about whether those things are safe. And the answer to that question is they are safe as long as the master password that you set for those things is very complex and you keep it secure. There have been some attacks involving those password managers, but for most people in personal use, using that as opposed to trying to remember passwords across a bunch of places or using the same password is a very important security mechanism. The second thing I would say is that one of the things that I recommend for people is, passwords can be very hard to remember. I will freely admit that. I think sometimes, people talking about passwords are a little obtuse and assume that everybody has like a memory for a billion different passwords across a whole bunch of websites. But, the one piece of recommendation I have is focus on the areas where money can be taken from you or where damage can happen. And again, that's financial accounts, email accounts. Somebody could break into your Facebook account and probably do a lot of damage, in a short period of time, at least with respect to your friends. So that's probably pretty important. And for those websites, you want really, really complex passwords. And I recommend to people that they use things like song lyrics. And song lyrics are something that you can remember very well. You may have a favorite song, so use that, or you may have 10 favorite songs. So use, a sentence worth of the refrain in the song as your password, and then tack on, like a $sign or a question mark or something at the end. So it's not just that, but, if your favorite song in the world is Baby Got Back, maybe your password is Baby Got Back 2424, $sign or something like that. And you want your passwords to be above 12 to 14 characters. So it used to be that if your password was 8 characters long, you were safe. But the rule for cybersecurity is as computing power gets better, the easier it is to break passwords. So if you have an 8-character password, it takes about 2 days to break that kind of password now. If you have 9 characters, it goes up to like a week. 10 characters, it goes up to like a year. 11 characters, it goes up even farther. So you really want to be in that 12 to 14 character range. And try and use special characters like $signs, ampersands, stars. And, again, unique passwords or using a password manager is really important.
What about when you're asked by Google or by your iPhone whether or not you want to store your password with them? Is that secure? Should we not do that?
Yeah, I hate when Google asks people to store their passwords. And the reason why is there have been a lot of attacks focused on stealing passwords from your web browser. And keep in mind, web browsers are the mechanism by which a lot of people get compromised. So rather than using Google to save your passwords, or Edge or Firefox or whatever browser you're using, use a program like 1Password or LastPass that's meant solely to be a password storage medium. And the reason I say that is Google is great at making browsers, but their job isn't to secure your passwords and do all that kind of stuff. Same thing with Microsoft Edge. Same thing. It's a little bit different on your iPhone because it's not kind of your web browser. But if you're asking about Safari on your iPhone, the web browser, and whether you should have that saved passwords, my answer is the same. I would say no. Instead, download LastPass and use it on your computer and use it on your phone. And the great thing is that it syncs between those two places. So if you log into certain places on your phone and certain places on your computer, it will keep track of all that stuff for you. And then the most important thing is to have that very, very secure master password on those password management places. But be wary of anything other than those password managers asking to store your credentials. Apple has gotten a little bit better at protecting those things in something called the keychain. But I think I would rely more on LastPass or 1Password. And for any apps that you use on your iPhone, most of them will give you the option to only open with Face ID or with a fingerprint if you have an Apple, or same thing on Samsung. And I really remind people, if you don't have a lock code on your phone, which you absolutely should, then you want to have those things in place, because you don't want people who pick up your phone, they can just unlock it, get into your bank app, which probably maybe logs in automatically, and start moving money out of your account. You want additional measures just like that. Because if I find your phone on a bus or in a Starbucks and you left it, and I don't have to do anything but just get directly into it, that could cause a lot of problems for you. You want to at least have a passcode that somebody's got to try, 9,999 or, 100,000 different codes. And most of the time you can set on your phone that if you have more than 10 attempts, it will wipe your phone. And that's another way to help prevent people from actually breaking into your phone.
So let's move on to identity theft. How important is it to act quickly when your personal information is stolen? And what's the most important thing to do if your identity is stolen?
Yeah, I think I'll answer that question. I also want to address one other thing, which is that, one of the things that we see a lot of is, companies have data breaches, and they may release your social security number, they may release your credit card information or your login and password, etc. And you kind of have to operate your life assuming that that information is probably going to get out there at some point in time, and that there are going to be people who want to steal your identity. The number one thing I tell people is, if you don't have a credit card company or some other piece of software that allows you to see what your credit report is, you should be looking at that more than annually. So, like, for example, I have a Chase card, and as part of the Chase app, you can look at your credit report and see if there are any accounts that have been opened for you. And I pay attention to that like a hawk. I get email alerts if any credit checks are done on me. I get alerts on all of that kind of stuff, and making sure that you know what's going on in your credit report and what's being opened is extremely important. If you're not going to be using credit, so let's say you're retired and you own your house and you have a car that you don't intend on buying a new one for, and there's absolutely no reason why somebody should be running your credit or taking out a loan in your name, call the credit agencies, so Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, and tell them to put a lock on your credit, which means no one can take out any credit in your name until that lock is taken off, and they will verify your identity, and they have extra checks to make sure that it's actually you. There's also something, and that's also called a credit freeze. The other thing is that to answer Jen's question, if you are a victim of identity theft and somebody's opened accounts in your name or is using your identity, the most important thing is to contact the credit agencies immediately, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, and have them put a fraud alert on your account, which allows them to notify you of additional openings. It also puts heightened scrutiny on your credit account. You can also lock your credit account after or put a freeze on it after the first instance. But identity theft can be very tricky. The other thing I tell people is, you may get letters in the mail that tell you, hey, we had a data breach and sign up for free credit monitoring. I normally will sign up for that credit monitoring, even if I have like 5 other places that I get credit monitoring from, mostly because a lot of those offerings come with like fraud guarantees or other protections in case you actually do lose a bunch of money. Because unrolling or winding back like accounts that have been opened in your name or debts that have been undertaken, or let's say somebody opens a credit card and charges up $5,000, the process to unwind that stuff can be kind of onerous. And if somebody gets to sort of opening a lot of accounts in your name and running rampant because you haven't been paying attention, it can be extremely hard to roll that back. One of the things I tell a lot of people is, when you shop online, there's sort of websites and they ask you, do you want to enter your credit card information, or do you want to use Apple Pay or PayPal Pay or whatever? And my answer is always to use Apple Pay or PayPal Pay. I just don't like entering my credit card number into websites, mostly because I don't know what their information security is like. I know enough about Apple to know that they've got pretty good information security, and I know that PayPal has a giant team of people who works on fraud, and you only have to enter your credit card information into PayPal once, as opposed to into Target and into Walmart and into all these other websites. I also do not have websites store my credit card information because I don't want them to have it and have a data breach. So I'm mostly tell people, try and avoid providing your credit card information to places unless you absolutely have to. We engage in online commerce all the time. And of course, Amazon has my credit card number for transactions. But if you're going to buy something from a unique place or a place that you're shopping at for the first time, see if there's another way that you can submit payment through like PayPal, Amazon, or Apple Pay instead of putting your credit card information in, because a lot of the fraud we see is I put my information in on Joe's, airconditionersupply.com, and they had a data breach and the information got out into the ether. And then somebody started charging a bunch of stuff up on my credit card. The other thing is keeping your email account secure and your financial account secure is another way to avoid having identity theft. And to, be very, considerate and be very sort of wise about who you provide your personal information to. I try and avoid submitting a lot of personal information when I surf on the web, mostly because, again, I don't know how these people are going to use my information. I don't know if they're going to market to me. I don't know if they sell my phone number to another company. Nobody wants to spend a bunch of time reading privacy policies to determine what companies do, but you should try and read privacy policies and just get a general idea of what people do with your information. I think sometimes you'd be pretty surprised about that. And the more people they share the information with, the more there's a breach risk. And I know I'm telling you things that make you sound like you should never go online and never do anything, but if you just take some few easy steps, I think you can, reduce the amount of fear and potential for an attack, because cybersecurity is not perfection. It's progress. You want to make progress, not reach perfection. And, if you think about it as a bear coming to eat you, you don't need to outrun the bear, right? You just need to outrun the other people that the bear is chasing and let him eat somebody else. And so, you just want to be one level above the people around you. And that will prevent you from actually having to be a piece of low-hanging fruit.
So a couple of questions about passwords and just security apps. Like someone had asked a question about McAfee, Total Protection, and other programs like that. How do they help you with respect to cybersecurity attacks and or identity theft, if at all? And my guess is that's just one thing you might want to invest in. It's not going to protect you 100%.
Yeah, I think, like Malwarebytes, McAfee, any antivirus product, The only thing those products do is look at your computer to determine if there's, malware or other types of viruses or worms or et cetera on the computer. And so that's looking at a narrow universe of what's on your computer, right? It's not looking at who's broken into your email account. It's not looking at who broke into your financial account or anything else with respect to your security. It's not even really looking at what websites you visit and what you click on. The only thing it looks at is actual software being downloaded. Now, some of those products start to look at like what IP addresses you're going to and where you're visiting, and it can provide you additional alerts. But understanding, the universe of what the software actually protects you from is the first part of sort of understanding what other security controls that you could put in place. Even if I had every antivirus piece of software on the planet installed on my computer, I would still use two-factor authentication. I would still be very wary of what websites I visit and what I click on. And I think if you can really kind of like, when you get an email, take just an additional second and be like, should I click on that? What bad things could happen if I click on that? And think about the emails before you're clicking on them. And keep in mind, if it's something really important, my general advice is they'll email you again, right? Most attackers will fire off one email, and if you don't click on it, they don't care. They're just trying to get people to click on stuff. And so if it's really your bank and they really need to get to you, they'll call you or they'll send you another email. And if you don't recognize who it is, like I try and tell people, one of the things that hackers focus on is your own sense of self-importance. And by that, I mean, everybody wants to get emails and everybody wants to have things directed to them. And, but the real answer is like, not everybody's trying to send you an email with special offers, and not everybody's trying to send you an email with good stuff or about your password changing. And so if you can keep that in check, that will help. And the thing is that the way that phishing emails are structured is all based on human nature. It's based on urgency, which is, oh my God, somebody broke into your account. You got to click here and reset your password. Or it's something that's too good to be true. Like I'll send you an email that says 50% off Apple iPhones and AirPods, and something that like could not possibly be true. And you're like, ooh, it's a deal. And you click on that and boom, your computer is infected. All of it is totally human nature. And if you can try and think about that, but before you click on emails, it'll save you a lot of sort of trouble. And, reputational damage. I think a lot of people forget that, other people take something from the fact that your email has been broken into, or your Facebook account got compromised, or you have to call your bank repeatedly because there's been fraud on your account. And taking the extra time to secure yourself is sort of really important to try and avoid those kinds of negative sort of community repercussions.
How do you know, or is there a way to know if your email or password has already been compromised? Are there sites you can check? Are there things you can do just to know if you've been compromised and you don't even know it yet?
Yeah, I'm gonna type into the chat a website. It's called Have I Been Pwned? Pwned is like a hacker speak for owned, which means hacked. And if you go to that website, it's run by a very well-known security researcher. You can enter in your email address and it'll tell you every attack that your email address has been involved in. It won't provide you the passwords that were used, but it will tell you whether your email has been associated with compromises. And there are also other, services that you can engage in to tell you what your what passwords might have been compromised. But if you see your account on there, and let's say it says, I'll use Target again. I'm not trying to pick on Target, but Target had a data breach involving your username. You should go around to every website that uses the same password as Target and change them all. Or if it says your password to MySpace, has been compromised, if anybody actually uses MySpace anymore, you would want to change any passwords that's the same as MySpace. So it's a good way of knowing where your information has been compromised. And if you use the same password on that site as other sites, you should change it. The one thing I will tell people is there are some like clickbait things on Facebook or other places that say, enter your password here and we'll tell you if it's been, used or compromised. Never click on those. The reason why is you have no idea who is on the other end of that. And I've seen some security researchers set up websites like that. I would never enter my password because there could be a malicious actor who compromised that website or who's running the website, and he's just collecting all kinds of passwords that he can use to guess and break into accounts. So I would avoid anything like that. And there's a question if there's supposed to be an O in Pwned, and no, it should be Pwned for Pwned.
Great.
Sorry.
Another question, that's okay. Another question we had was, is there a difference in the security features between iPhones, Apple versus PCs with Androids? And, is there any difference there that would make you choose one versus the other?
Yeah, I'm a big Apple person for one reason only. And this is not meant to be like an advertisement for Apple, but the Apple App Store is pretty well regulated, and all of the apps that go onto that store go through a bunch of checks. So it's really the rare occasion that you hear about a compromised app that gets into the Apple App Store because of all the work that they do. They've also spent a bunch of time putting in privacy notices that will tell you what information your apps collect about you, give you lots of controls over whether you want to share that information. It'll even remind you that you've set a certain app to collect your location or your contact information and ask you if you still want to do that. The same cannot be said for Android. And, there's been a lot of sort of talk about the Android, the Google Play Store being a little more Wild Wild West-ish and having more compromised apps. So I'm a little bit of an Apple fanboy in that regard. And the same thing with Macs versus PCs. For a while, it used to be that 99% of all malware was written for PCs, so Windows-based devices. That number is probably down to like 80% because, as more apples are being used, they become targets for attackers. But for the most part, it's almost impossible to compromise a Mac unless you click and agree to have your own PC compromised. That is not the same for Windows computers, and why you see the vast majority of large-scale compromises occur on PCs. I say that while I'm using a PC right now for my work. I have a PC at home. I also have an Apple. So I think the preference is probably for Macs. The problem with that is that lots of software may not be compatible with Macs. And so I think it really depends on your personal usage. But if you only surf the internet and go to your financial accounts and check your email, I would recommend an Apple because I think it's very user-friendly. There's less risk that you're going to be compromised by malicious software. I bought my parents an Apple for that exact purpose. And I can say that they've had that Apple for 10 years and never had a cybersecurity problem. And I know 100% that would not be the same if they had a computer, because they had a computer for 4 years before that. And every time I went back home, I had to go fix something on it. So there is a difference, but the difference is getting smaller, but it still favors Apples.
So speaking of, having to fix things if they've gone wrong, if a computer has been infected, how do you recommend it be cleaned up? Are there specific companies to use or services?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is always a tough one. So I think programs like Malwarebytes are extremely good for cleaning up your computer, but there are certain types of infections on your machine that can't be fully cleaned without professional help. I used to do that, and I still do it sometimes, and it can be a pretty prolonged process. I think, there's like the Best Buy service, whose name is escaping me right now. And then there's, yeah, the Geek Squad. And there's also local computer companies that can assist you with cleaning that up. That's probably your best bet. With the caveat that, I always tell people, try and find somebody that knows about technology that you trust to kind of get some advice from. My parents are lucky. They have a son who works in information security, and not everybody is kind of that lucky. But if you do have somebody that you trust on technology, I would talk with them. But really, if you have any suspect that there is malicious software on your computer, I think the first step would be run Malwarebytes and see what it does. And if you can't run Malwarebytes because something is weird, that's an indication that perhaps there is a problem on your computer and it's being prevented from being run. And keep in mind that what your antivirus detects may be much different than what Malwarebytes finds. And by that, I mean, antivirus is just one layer of security, and it is pretty easy to get by antivirus software. And so Malwarebytes is the next step. And if things aren't back to normal, I would take it to a computer repair shop and tell them exactly what's going on. And if you just can't get comfortable that the computer is working, my answer is always take what you need off of it and start all over again. Wipe it and start from the beginning. You'll also notice that your computer is probably remarkably faster when you start back from the beginning.
We talked earlier about two-factor authentication, and oftentimes institutions that you may do that with can either send you a text or an email. Is it more secure to do one versus the other? Because of course, if your email has been compromised and an email is sent, that could also be a problem.
Yeah, I do not like the email methodology there, because for the exact reasons we just discussed, if your email account gets compromised, it's useless. So I would prefer text over email. And like I said, there are other authentication apps called like Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, which are two-factor applications. And for example, my Hotmail account, when I log in, it sends me a text message, or I can provide a code from Microsoft Authenticator. So I think the preference would be an authenticator app first, then text. And then if you can't get either of those, then I suppose email would be a good third yet crappy option. And the reason why I put text second is because there are some attacks that can get around the texting. And there was a very famous attack of the CEO of Twitter. And the way they got around multi-factor authentication for him was they actually did something called SIM swapping, which means I'm Justin, I call up Verizon and I say, hey, I'm the CEO of Twitter, insert name here. I'm having a problem with my old phone. I bought a new phone. Can you switch it over to this new SIM, this new phone? And so the attacker's phone becomes Twitter's, CEO's phone, and then they log into his account, hit OK on the phone, and they're into the account. And that's called SIM swapping. And it's actually been used against a lot of celebrities. And the sad thing is that you would be surprised how bad representatives from your cell phone company are at actually verifying your personal information. And you can probably, through very simple social engineering, get them to do just about anything. So if I wanted to become Jen Hannon for a day, I could just call up the phone company, get on my best girl voice, and provide some information about Jen that I collected on the internet, have her phone number switched over to my phone, and start getting text messages and all kinds of stuff about her without her knowing, until 5 or 6 hours later, she goes, that's weird. My phone I haven't gotten any calls today. and it says no service. And then she eventually calls the phone company and they tell her, oh yeah, you got a new phone. And she's like, no, I didn't. So in any event, there are attacks that can be used on that front, and they're pretty well publicized and pretty well easy to do.
We had talked a little bit earlier about social media and what to not put on social media as part of your profile or other things to protect yourself, your identity. But what other protections might you recommend as it relates to social media? I've heard you say that you think Facebook is what, the seventh ring of hell.
Yeah.
So what can we do for those of us who do use Facebook or other Instagram, whatever it might be, other social media apps to protect ourselves?
Yeah, and I say that about Facebook only from like a cybersecurity perspective, and it is the seventh ring of hell from the cybersecurity perspective. Same thing with Twitter, Instagram, and the only reason I say that is that a lot of the way that the platforms are based are also based on human behavior, which is that we're incentivized to like things and click on things and interact with other people. And from a hacker's perspective, that is a jackpot, right? You've got people clicking on things and interacting with other people. And so they can easily slide into those relationships or impersonate people. But the most important thing I tell people on social media about social media is be very careful what information you put on social media. I think a lot of people assume like, well, it's just my friends that are part of my group. And that may be true with respect to certain social media platforms. But for Twitter, unless your account is private, everybody can see what you put on there. And you may have public portions of your Facebook page. Same thing with LinkedIn. All LinkedIn posts by default are public. And so what I tell people is, if your password is a word that you frequently use on social media. So for example, your dog's name is Reggie, and you talk about Reggie all the time on Twitter and on Facebook. It is trivial for an attacker to look at your Facebook page and try Reggie as your password. And you'd think that would be sort of above somebody actually targeting you. But I could script all of that and do it very easily without actually caring about you directly, and mostly about just users. So what you share with other people on social media is very, very important. And if you are going to share information about Reggie, just make sure Reggie isn't your password. And I think a lot of people forget that. Your birthday is not a good password. Your kids' names, if you talk about your kids on social media, they shouldn't be your password. I don't know how many times I ask people, after a compromise, like, was your password, secure? Was it long? And they're like, well, it's my kid's name and then their birth year. It's Sally 1994. That's not a good password. Neither is, if you went to Marquette, if your password is Marquette 1 or Marquette in the year of your graduation, if it says on your profile that you graduated from Marquette, I have 90% of your password. And that seems counterintuitive, but it really is true. So you really want to pick things that are outside the universe of easily discernible things on your social media account. The other thing I tell people is be very careful who you connect with on Facebook and LinkedIn. I will not actually accept a friend request on LinkedIn unless I've spoken to you on the phone or met you in person. Mostly because I have no idea who is on the other end of that. And it is very easy for me to create a profile and become Jen Hannon, and start befriending Jen Hannon's friends. And people might not even know that there's two Jen Hannons on there. Or maybe they friended one and they assume Jen created two accounts. And so then I can start sending messages as Jen. So I'm very careful about that. Mostly because that is used to do recon on people and to learn about sort of what they share publicly, what email addresses are. So again, if you make your email address public on LinkedIn, I don't even need to guess your email account anymore. I've got it now. Now I know to go log into Hotmail with your email address. And now all I've got to figure out is your password. And conveniently, you've told me that on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. And these things become absolutely trivial to do.
What about malware being spread through social media? Does that happen, or is that not as common?
Yeah, it does, but mostly in the form of like you clicking on things. There's lots of surveys on Facebook, like tell me what, high school you went to and, your favorite color, and I'll tell you like which celebrity you are. And some of those things can be fun. And again, it's mostly like, I look at every link as like a cost risk analysis, right? Do I really need to click on this link? And if I do, am I willing to compromise my computer for it? And I think a lot of people, treat the internet as an entertainment avenue. And it can be on sites where you have a lot of confidence. Again, I think on the Facebook side of things, like being very careful what you click on and hovering over the link to understand where it goes. So if you hover over on one of those survey links, it says it goes to a Russian website, like give me your password.ru, like you probably don't want to click on it. And I think the assumption too is that if it's on Facebook, on that platform, it must not be malicious. And I think the opposite is most likely true. Like if it's on Facebook, a lot of times it may be malicious. And you have no idea where people are posting links from, why they're posting them, especially things that have been shared repeatedly. And you click on something and, everything is shared to get more likes. And therefore it is inherently clickbait from the start. And so just being very careful on that front. There are very good uses for Facebook to stay in touch with family and with friends, to understand what's going on in the news and all kinds of other sort of features. And I think all of those are positive. I treat the internet as needing a healthy dose of skepticism on anything that I do. And it doesn't take all the fun out of it. I still love the internet. I just am very careful what I click on.
So one last quick question, going back to Macs and iPads and things, are Macs as secure as an iPad? The same consideration?
Yeah, they're both made by Apple, and you can treat iPads as effectively the same thing as an iPhone. They run on almost the same operating system. But all the rules of cybersecurity still apply. So you can have an iPad, but if you still click on a bunch of malicious links, that's not going to save you. And if you don't have two-factor authentication, it's not going to save you either. So yes, they are a little bit more secure, and they're exactly like Macs because they're all made by Apple and they run on the same effective operating system.
Great. And then the very last question for you is, when might you need a cybersecurity lawyer to help you?
Yeah, so we help people with all kinds of stuff. If it's run-of-the-mill identity theft, typically the credit agencies are the best places to help you. But if you have a privacy complaint with an outside provider, or you think somebody that is actually breaking into your systems and you have evidence to prove it, we work with law enforcement to get those people prosecuted. We've worked with companies and individuals to do that. And it's good to know a cybersecurity lawyer because we're pretty tuned into information security generally. Providing the kind of advice that you would be looking for to secure financial accounts and other information. There's also tons of great resources online to get this information. And hopefully if you ever have to take your computer into somebody, that person should be a wealth of knowledge on that front. But we offer all kinds of help, both in the personal capacity, and we work with companies on data breaches too, amongst a whole host of other things.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. And thank you to everyone who's attended and joined us and asked questions. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, please take time to complete the survey regarding our program today. You'll receive that via an email link. And we are in the process, as Jenny mentioned, of organizing our next program. So please keep an eye out for that invite later this fall. Thank you again for spending your lunch hour with us.
Thank you, everybody.